Welcome to NAMM Week. My name is Alfrelyn Roberts, and I am the National Second Vice President of the National Association of Negro Musicians. NAMM Week is a virtual musical experience packed with exciting discussions and performances from around the country. One of the things that I'm excited about is NAMM Generations. It's an opportunity for each region to show you just how intergenerationally connected we are. So for our NAMM members, I know it's not the same, but this is an opportunity for us to see one another without actually being with one another. But for those of you who might not be a member of NAMM, this is an opportunity for us to show you just who we are. So tune in to Facebook and YouTube, 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time, so that you can see riveting discussions and fantastic performances from musicians from across this country. You know, I always say that NAMM is our best kept 100-year-old secret, but this week we'll be sharing it with you. Join us. Welcome to NAMM Week.
I want to start with a quote, so I'm ready to begin. First of all, good day. I'll say good day because we're in different parts of the day. And I'm just glad to see you here because that lets me know that we are all well, we are all healthy, and we are all living, and that is truly a blessing. So praise God for all of that. I would like to begin this conversation with a quote by Karen Casey, and she states, "We are each spinning our individual threads, lending texture, color, and pattern to the big design that is serving us all." I selected this quote because it speaks to what I hope you will consider for our conversation today, which is tapestry. And when I think of a tapestry, I think of all of the threads that it takes to weave into the tapestry. And I think of NAM as a tapestry that has been created, but it is also continuing in its creation. And part of that creation has been the roles that you have served in as leaders of the organization at different times. So I am going to make two assumptions here. I'm going to make assumptions that part of the audience that is listening to us knows everything about you. But I also have to assume that there is another audience that doesn't even know we exist. They don't know who you are and what you have done. So I want to start with that in mind by asking each of you, and I will start probably with Dr. Patterson first. If you would just, and this is for each of you, give us a brief history of your music journey.
Well, since my journey has been longer than anyone else's, that may take a little time. But let me say that I began as a musician in a church choir, in the youth church choir, singing soprano. And I then graduated into the community course called the Dunbar Community Course in Ann Arbor, and stayed with that choir through high school, singing variously tenor and then bass. I then went into Ann Arbor High School, and then into the service, where I conducted the service a chapel course with no chops at all. I didn't know what I was doing, but they wanted me to do it, and so I did it, and enjoyed it, and learned from it. Then I came back from the service and took a job and sang in a jazz quartet, which I organized, and I loved it. And we were quite good. And then from there, I thought, well, gee whiz, I ought to try to figure out a way to get a college education. And the only thing I know anything about, and I knew very little about that, was music. So I enrolled in Eastern Michigan University, which was at that time Michigan State Normal College for Teachers, and then transferred to the University of Michigan, from which I received 2 degrees in voice performance, and then took a job teaching at Southern University, where I really began to learn how to appreciate our music. Because I'd been born and raised in Ann Arbor, and there were very few of us in Ann Arbor at the time, 1930s, and Southern University and my subsequent teaching assignment at Virginia State College in Petersburg, Virginia, really taught me about the value of our music as a people. I knew very little about the musicians, but I knew about the music. So I then began to be encouraged to learn about the people. And I must say that my experience in NAM as a member of the board, as the first basic member of the organization. I was brought there by Brazil, the late Brazil Denard. Then I became a member of the board and was a member of the board for about 8 years, and was fortunately asked to lead the organization as its president in 1990. And I remained until 1996, during which time I was fortunate enough to be inspired to write a proposal to the National Endowment for the Humanities, which resulted in our having, as an organization, funds to afford beginning the research and writing of the history of the organization, which I thought was an extremely important thing for us to do, because we were, during my time, celebrating the 75th anniversary. And I think I thought at the time, and I think now, that it was very important for an organization of African-American musicians to have some documentation of its existence in writing, in a permanent record. So that research began under the direction of the late, great Eileen Southern, which was completed with the wonderful woman at Howard University. What's her name again? Uzee? McGinty, Doris McGinty. Yes, and it was finished under the leadership of the presidential leadership of I'm gotten to the place now, I'm in my 90th year, and I've gotten to the place where pulling names out at the moment that I want them pulled out is a little taxing for me.
May I help you out?
I would appreciate it very much.
Okay. It's a nice segue into the person that you're trying to think of, which I believe is Dr. Uzee Brown.
No, it was completed. No? It was completed. It was taken up by Uzee Brown.
Okay.
And
let me clarify something. It all but everything was done except the publication at the end of my administration, and I had to pass it on to the incoming president, Roland Carter, but it had
Roland Carter. That's the name I was trying to find.
Center for Black Music Research for publication.
And I appreciate the clarification. Thank you. I do understand. And don't think it's because you're 90. It happens to all of us. So I thank you for that.
It happens a little more profoundly for me, actually. Let me put it that way.
But you get kudos for that. So thank you for being here. So with that, thank you very much for that. You, Dr. Uzee Brown, make sure that I get that right. Can you tell us about your musical journey, please?
Sure. As a child, I was always fascinated with music, and I did something that was kind of unusual because I had heard my mother play and another relative in my household and play the piano, and I wanted to learn so much, but we did not own a piano. However, there was a piano in my grandmother's house, and she had passed, and my grandfather no longer lived there. It was in a very rural community that I grew up. So I had to go up and slip into that old house, which was an old 2-story house, and try and learn to play the piano on my own. And my mother thought it was dangerous because I had to go about a mile and a half to get to it on foot. And so she said to my father, Uzee Sr., Uzee, we've got to get a piano so he can continue to try and do something without having to go up there all the time, because I was absolutely driven to want to learn music. So I was basically self-taught. And so my mother purchased a piano for $35, and that is where my real excitement for music making began to foment. I became a member of the band in high school and ran into a great guy whose name was Rudolph Riley. He was my band director. And I had fully intended to pursue pre-med as my professional interest. But during the summer in 1967, he said, I really think you would do well to have an experience in music. And I'm going to recommend you, and we'll send in a tape with your trombone playing to Hampton Institute for the Summer Music Institute. And that is my first real immersion. Hampton was the school that I went to before coming to Morehouse as a high schooler. So I had to make some decisions when I decided to go to college, but I chose Morehouse because I graduated from Benjamin E. Mays High School. And Benjamin E. Mays was president, going out as a matter of fact, at Morehouse at the time that I came in as a student. So I went to Morehouse and still with the intentions of pursuing biology pre-med, and ran into my first week, Wendell Whalum. And he said to me, Cowpens, he called me that for a year. And he said, that's a curious name, but I know Cowpens because your cousin's in the Glee Club. You can sing, son. I want you to come and sing, be on time. Gave me a rehearsal schedule, and that began my musical excitement. Well, so much happened in my freshman year musically that made me decide to pursue music as my career. Among those things were performing in the Second International Choral Festival under the direction of Robert Shaw, who had been only recently appointed to the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And it was just wonderful because we went to Town Hall, to the National Cathedral, where I met for the first time and the only time, Warner Lawson. We went to the Lincoln Center and performed at Avery Fisher Hall, and we met people from 16 different countries around the world. I was caught on fire with music. So I had to call home and make some decisions. And my family said, do what is going to make you happy as a career. We are not bent on your trying to do music, pre-med. So that is why I chose music as my major. And then in my senior year at Morehouse, I had the fortunate pleasure of going on a 5-country tour of Africa. That was yet another eye-opening experience, and I'm continually being immersed in this music that brought African and African-American culture closer. But the real turning point for me in terms of my early interest at the college level was my engagement with Dr. T.J. Anderson, who was the first permanently appointed composer in residence with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra that was someone of color. He was jointly hired by the Atlanta Symphony and by Morehouse as an adjunct, which is why I chose to study composition while I was simultaneously studying voice with Wendell Whalum. And it was a result of my interaction with him that I wound up not only copying parts for the orchestration of Treemonisha, but eventually I performed one of the roles in the Atlanta Symphony's world premiere in 1972 in the role of Parson Althoff. I completed my undergraduate degree and went on to Bowling Green State University in composition. But I was always fascinated with voice, and I studied there with Andreas Polominos. That is actually, and when I finished, I will never forget this. Wendell Whalum called me a week before graduation and said, so what are you doing next week when you finish your degree? I thought he meant immediately. And I said, well, I'm going to South Carolina and I'm spending some time doing X, Y, and Z. He said, no, son, what are your career plans? And so I said, I hadn't really thought about it. He said, well, would you like to come back to Morehouse College? I was overwhelmed and excited and stunned. And I said, of course I would. So that is how I wound up going to Morehouse College as a young faculty member. I always say that for the first 3 years, I owe all my students a refund because I was doing on-the-job training. But I went to Morehouse as a faculty member. And then I had the great fortune of meeting someone who came to do a recital at Spelman College, who is in this video right below me now, Dr. Willis Patterson. And it was that interaction that made me decide I got to go to Michigan. I want to go on into, I would have gone into theory composition likely in the PhD program, but I said, I want to do voice, I'm going. And Dr. Patterson took a risk on my doing that and changing gears and going into voice. And it was a very happy situation because I completed my master's degree, a second master's degree, as well as my terminal degree at the University of Michigan, and returned to Morehouse. This is a little bit long, but I want to say those interactions made all the difference in the world because I had met some giants who had already been so connected to African-American music. Wendell Whalum, T.J. Anderson, Ted McDaniel, who was my band director, and Willis Patterson. And I became very much involved with NAM as a result of my connection to Morehouse College. So that pretty much sums up the general overview of my, my path.
Thank you very much. So I will move to past President David Morrow.
I have to remember to unmute. Okay.
Okay.
So it is very interesting as I'm listening to all of this. You were talking about threads and things like that. Musical journey. Well, as a child, I was taking piano lessons. My brother, 3 years older than I, was also musically inclined, and he was very interested in music. So we're 3 years apart, competing with each other, trying to, you know, I want to be growner than I am and be with him and do what he does and all of that. So in elementary school, you know, I was singing in different things and even little musicals that they had and so forth. And Donald was doing things and so forth. And so my parents were concerned. They said, okay, well, we're going to let you take piano lessons. We're going to rent a piano and make sure that this is a real thing. And if it isn't, we can take that piano back. So they rented it. They rented to own. They ended up having to own it. So we actually did practice, and they made sure of that. And so we were in different organizations. I think I was more of the performer. Donald was more cerebral about music in terms of studying things and looking at making connections with popular music and classical music and all kinds of things, even as a youngster. Well, I followed my brother through elementary school, junior high school, high school. We went to all of the same schools. And I was determined that I was not going to go to the same college. We had enough of following each other. I was not at all embarrassed to be Donald's brother, but I was going to find my own path and I was going to go to another school. Donald was already at Morehouse College talking about threads, studying composition with Uzee Brown. So I told him I was going somewhere else, and he said, "Where's your application to that school?" And I said, "Well, this is where I'm going." I showed it to him. He took it from me. He said, "Fill this out," and gave me the Morehouse application, and said, "This is where you're going to go. So just fill that out and turn it in." And I didn't want to do it, but I said, you know, he seemed adamant. He actually took the other one from me, so I filled it out. I got in Morehouse, and the interesting thing was that I was a freshman the last year Mr. Brown was teaching in that early period that he was talking about. So my brother had his senior recital under Mr. Brown, and I had my first year in the Glee Club under Mr. Brown, who was also accompanist of the Glee Club. Went on tour, everything. So we had wonderful interactions. Mr. Brown was headed to Michigan. So he left us, and I ended up being very much inspired again by Wendell Whalum. He created the choral conducting concentration that we have in our music program under the time that I was there. So he added choral literature and conducting. And actually, I took that. I was supposed to do 2 recitals, one in voice and one in conducting. And I was having struggles putting the choir together. Dr. Whalum, in his wisdom, said, "You only need 1 recital to graduate, just sing." And so I finished in voice. So I ended up wanting to go to be a conductor, though. Choral music took off from there. And so I ended up applying to different places, not the least of which was the University of Michigan. So I went to audition there. Guess who picked me up from the airport? Uzee Brown, who was finishing his doctorate. And he brought me to the choir rehearsal. I understand we found out they added a rehearsal for this young person who was auditioning. And so I did the audition, and it was such a comfort to see him there. I don't know whether he meant to or not, but as I did things right, I could see a little smirk or a smile. I said, okay, I'm doing okay, and went through there. And of course, who do I meet once I enroll at the University of Michigan? Willis Patterson. And so he, of course, made sure I was okay in his own way, in making sure that he kept up with me, and I was there. I finished that degree really quickly, and I came back to Morehouse College. Now here, quickly though, I was teaching. I was finished my master's degree, and you know how that is. I wanted to be a college choir director. You know the catch-22. I needed a terminal degree in order to get the experience I needed to have to get the terminal degree. So every time I applied for a college job, they said, well, you have the master's degree, but you need the terminal degree. And if I applied for the doctoral programs, they said you needed experience. And so I was just in the middle of stuff. So I ended up teaching at a high school. Lord have mercy, teaching beginning guitar. I don't play the guitar. They gave me the gospel choir, of course, and the junior high music theater. What? So I was doing all of that, and it had not been a great day. I get this phone call from Wendell Whalen, very similar to Uzee's story. I thought it was so funny. So these high school kids had gotten on my nerves that day. He asked me, what are you doing? I said, I'm tired right now, I'm kind of resting. He said, no, fool, what are you doing? And so I said, I'm teaching at a high school. He said, well, would you like to come and be my assistant with the Glee Club at Morehouse College? But don't answer right now. I want you to think about it, because if you're making more money now in what you're doing now, and not, you need to stay there and do that. Don't jump up and run down here. Here's what your salary is going to be, etc. So I said, sure, I'll think about it. I hung up the phone, did a cartwheel, and did some other things. And I purposely waited a day, and then I called him back. Dr. Weller, I'm sure I'll take the job. I'll be happy to do that. I'm very interested in that. I was so happy to be down there, and ended up, again, interacting with Uzee as a young teacher, following what he was doing, had a wonderful mentor in Wendell Whalen, ended up being the assistant director of the Morehouse College Glee Club for 6 years under Wendell Whalen, and he passed away. And I became the first year. It's funny because they said I was acting director. They didn't want to make a permanent position. And the person who became chair, Calvin Grimes, said, "Now you don't put that on any documents. You're not acting. You're doing it for real." So, but I became the director of the Morehouse College Glee Club, and the rest is history. I've done a lot of wonderful things, had a lot of wonderful experiences, and have tried to keep it going, keep the tradition going, but move ahead at the same time. So that's sort of my journey.
Well, thank you. 3 in a row. Okay. Past President Byron Smith.
It's very interesting how so many of our lives parallel in different ways. Talking about having a piano at our grandparents' house as a little kid. You know how you used to go in there and just beat on the piano, and then you hit a chord and it's like, wow, that sounds good. Let me find it again. And I started beating on it again. And when I couldn't find it, I was so frustrated. And that was like at age 3 or 4. Right after that, my parents recognized, because I had an uncle that played piano. Music was part of the family. Parents got a piano. I started taking lessons around 4 or 5, and I just enjoyed it. But I also enjoyed playing Little League Baseball. And so I had to choose because, you know, back in the 60s, you had well-rounded experiences. All the boys played Little League something, and you took music lessons. The girls took ballet and, you know, and took music lessons. And so I had to decide whether or not I was going to be a Dodger or be a musician. So I stopped taking piano lessons for about 3 years to pursue my career in Little League Baseball. But due to the fact that I couldn't slide, I decided I need to go back to piano. And so my piano career started taking off. My father was the superintendent of Sunday school, so he was going to get his money's worth. And he made me sit on the piano and play all those hymns there for the Sunday school. And I also had to play for the junior choir and all those different experiences. And I also was a part of a youth orchestra. And then in high school, I had the opportunity to be what they call the student director. And basically, my high school director really was not the most exuberant person in energy, so he hired me to come in for no pay to plot all the marching band shows, to direct the rehearsals. I never forget back in Star Wars when we had, you know, the ship going across the field with the fire extinguishers and all those little tricks you did back there in the late 70s. And so I was so frustrated because I recognized, wow, I'm doing all this work and I'm not making any money. So I'm going to go to a school, get me a credential, and then learn how to be a choir director and be a instrumental music person. And no, I didn't play piano in the marching band. I do play some other wind instruments. But so I went to a state school and was successful with that. And I actually fell in between piano and choral vocals. So I kind of like did a double major in that. Leaving that experience working with very historic conductor, Frank Pooler, I was polarized, you know, and I learned a lot of things. And if you listen to a lot of my arrangements, there's a lot of Frank Pooler in some of my arrangements, you know. They're very non-African American. Well, one of the members that graduated from Long Beach State with me, she was actually going to a church where the director was Dr. Albert McNeil. And so when I completed my degree, she says, well, you know, you need to come and meet Albert. Come to the church one Sunday. And so I went over to Christian Fellowship and I met Albert. And I walked in, and you know, your first experience when you meet Albert is like, I thought I was meeting someone, you know, a little darker, you know, little, you know. And then Albert just engulfed me into that experience. And it was just such a great experience meeting him. And he invited me to come audition for the Jubilee Singers. And so I was a big part of the class of '85 of the Albert McNeil Jubilee Singers. And so I attributed to him to expose me to some of these works that I did not do in my Anglo-Saxon experience at Long Beach State. Albert was very important and exposed me to these great composers and touring and singing with him. And even more importantly, him coming to me when rehearsal says, you know, you get to be the accompanist for this group. So I said, me, little old me, thank you, Albert. Also in the educational aspect, I got my credentials to teach middle school and high school, my secondary credentials. And just like what David went through, I taught junior high for 1 semester. And I recognized these parents want their kids to come home after school. I can't kill them. And I constantly ran. I constantly had to try to stay in front of all these brats. I had a choir that they called Varsity Glee. It was back in junior high school days when we have 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and they were all boys that met at 6th period. You figure out the rest. So when it was all done, and I recognized we did our little Christmas concert doing Natalie Sleep, and all these terror children combed their hair back and slicked it over and looked perfect in front of their parents, I recognized this was the worst con game that could ever happen. I got a call from Harvard College. We need an accompanist. Okay. I left school. I don't want to teach anymore. To this day, I have a lifetime credential, have been to a high school, middle school. I can't do that demographic. So I got started at Harvard College as an accompanist, actually. Worked into becoming a teacher and worked in and taking over the choral vocal and the commercial music aspect of the school. And me being a person who comes from older parents, I've been there 35 years. I haven't figured out a way to leave yet. But from that experience, one of the other full-time instructors was Dr. J. Harrison Wilson out of Bishop College. Dr. Wilson was there, and he was one of the other teachers. It was so funny. He was so excited to see a person of color because there at Harvard, there are not many of us, and see someone so talented to come in. Well, he reached out to me and he wanted me to come and audition for the NAM piano competition, the scholar competition. I think it was in 1985 or something way back then. Had not heard of the organization. Albert hadn't told me anything, but it was around the same time when I joined Jubilee Secrets. That was 85 too. But that was my first exposure to NAM. And then from that experience, all of a sudden they started a new branch. We were supposed to be a young adult youth branch that wasn't in the bylaws. Then this William Grant Still group that had a bunch of 40-year-old people that were supposed to be youth. But you know, hey, it happened. And I never forget what we were told by the board: you can't be a youth branch. What are you people doing? And so they made us a full adult branch, and we got our we got our big start at the San Diego convention. That's where I had opportunity to meet so many of you at the San Diego convention. Was elected to the board in 1991 at the end of, at the beginning of Dr. Patterson's, and it was right when Uncle Bill was going out on the board. So my first meeting was with him, and Dr. Patterson's were taking over. And the exciting thing about all of my board experiences, I had the opportunity to work under all of these gentlemen who are past presidents. As I've completed my presidency, I'm still excited about what NAM has done. It helped me to discover myself as an African-American musician. It helped me find my Blackness, because we don't have HBCUs this side of the Mississippi. So it's a little difficult to go to a Morehouse here in, you know, Moreno Valley. And it's a little difficult to have these experiences, but NAM was very important and helped me understand and appreciate, you know, these composers that I heard so much about. But that's basically my musical story. How it ends, I have to let you know later.
Well, thank you. It will not end. It will continue forever. All right, our current president, Anne Marie Hudley Simmons, the sixth woman to run this organization and be in the leadership position.
Oh, thank you. I was locating the unmute button. Here's another thread in your tapestry. I was born in Chicago, the middle child of two brothers, and I started my earlier years in Robbins, Illinois, which is, I guess you would call it suburbia. Then it was just called the outskirts of Chicago. It had one school, and that school was one big room, and you said that was my only experience to a one-room schoolhouse. That kind of dates me too, by the way. But although my brother, by the age of 18 months, spoke in complete sentences, I stuttered severely until about the age of 13 years old. And my saving grace was music. That's why I'm so passionate about music, and particularly music education till this day. So my parents moved out of Robbins to the west side of Chicago, and that was not the right side of Chicago. You're supposed to be in, if you were Black, you're supposed to be in the south side of Chicago. That's where all the notable Blacks were. But they couldn't afford the south side, so we moved to the west side of Chicago. And my brother was taking, at that time, violin lessons and piano lessons, and even played the guitar. I wasn't allowed to touch the guitar or the violin, but I would follow him when he got off the piano, and I would try to pick out things that he was playing on the piano. And my mother also was a soloist. She was a soprano. And she probably would have been a notable soprano, but she chose a different path. She married a minister, and she became a minister's wife. And that ended her career. However, when she heard me play a selection that she had been singing in a church, she decided that I should take lessons. So I studied with Goldie Rhodes and with Maudlin Kelly, who is the grandmother of Arthur Griffin in Chicago. And that just opened up so many doors for me. I was still not speaking very well, but at least I was able to express myself musically. So people would come over to the house and they'd hear William talk, and they would hear me play the piano. But suffice it to say, this musical experience that my parents recognized led me to the salvation that I have today. Another aspect of my early experiences in education, was the onslaught of dyslexia. And my parents don't know when it began, but they did know, and they were perplexed with my vision issues and the problems with headaches and confusion in thought. It's all a part of a handicap that was not addressed at that time. It is now. But the fact of the matter is I could express myself very well playing the piano, but I could not express myself very well speaking or writing, because all my words, I'd miss sentences or I'd leave out letters. And so that had been a problem all of my life. And even till today, I can say there has been some recovery, but not as much as I would like, of course. But I was able to play by ear, and I was able to play for the printed page. Now, when I first went to Goldie Rhodes, my first piano teacher, I would say to her, would you play that for me? And she would play it for me, and I'd go home and just tear it up. And my mother was wise enough. She called Goldie Rhodes and said, please don't play another thing for Anne Marie, because she only hears it in her ear. She comes home and she copies it. She's not playing a thing on that page. And when I went back the next week to have a lesson with her and asked her the same question, she said, no, Anne Marie, I think I want you to just follow. And I thought I would die. I thought I was going to fall off that piano bench and pass out. But that forced me to learn how to read music and how to connect the page to the piano, to the ear, to the eye. It all became one thing. So that to this day, when I see a printed page, I just see it with my hands and with my head. So the study of music became my salvation. But I still hated school, because another thing that I didn't mention was that I was in first grade for 3 years. Now, I was 2.5 years younger than my brother. So you know how many years I was behind him in school. And as David said, I followed my brother to the next school. And William was brilliant. He had this huge IQ. I mean, he never came home with anything less than 100. And here I was, a person who hated school and was still not reading or doing math that well. And I would walk into the biology class and the teacher said, oh, another Hudley. And I said, no, I'm his sister, but I'm not that Hudley, you know. For me, I'd have to read the chapter, 50 times at night, many hours after mom said, turn off the light. I had to read it again and again and again, because with the dyslexia, it was disappearing, constantly disappearing as I was reading it. And my brother could glance at the page and score 100 off of any test. However, in that school, I ran into, because I still hate, long before there was such a thing called school phobia. This is when I hated school. I ran into Dr. Ewald because I wanted to be in the band. And band started at 7:30 in the morning. I got to Dr. Ewald's class at 7:30 in the morning, and the door was closed. I knocked on the door, a student came to the door, and the class was full of all these students. By the way, there must have been 34 Black students in the entire school. So me standing at the door stuck out like a bad picture for anybody in that classroom. And Dr. Ewald was maybe 4 foot nothing, but he was huge and his face was huge. And he said, are you Anne Marie Hudley? And I said, yes. How dare you come to my class late? And I'm saying, wait, it's only 7:30. To start my class at 7:30, you've got to be here at 7:25. And of course, he said this with his face growing redder and redder and redder. I finally got into the band. Of course, I was in the marching band, and it happened to be the kind of band that did formations, and I enjoyed all that. And I played the glockenspiel. But it was at that time that I was introduced to the marimba. And my mother happened to go to Orchestra Hall and heard a marimba concert. And she came home and said, Anne Marie, you're going to start playing the marimba. I didn't know what a marimba was, but she got me this 1-octave marimba. And I could return it. So then I had a 2-octave marimba. And finally, by the age of 13, I got the full 4.5-octave marimba that I still have to this day. And I keep it because the keys are made of rosewood, and they're making them in synthetic, and the rosewood ones are very expensive. Well, you would have thought the marimba and I were synonymous. Every morning before I went to school, I practiced the marimba. I came home, it was marimba, piano, do homework. And it was a very interesting time for me. However, when I finally graduated from college, I went to Roosevelt University, and Lambert wrote this fantastic concerto for piano and marimba. And I still have the piano, the marimba part, and he has long since transitioned, and I don't have the accompaniment, so I don't know how I'm going to ever match that together. But I decided to become an international marimbist. So my dad made these boxes to put these 12 pieces of marimba together. We went to the airport. They all fit in my dad's car. He had a huge car. We went to Spain. That was my first trip. Got off in Valencia, and I said, "Taxista," and then he said, "Sí, señorita," and then I need to get my instrument to the locale. And he sees these 5 boxes. It took us 3 taxis to take my marimba to the first locale. And that literally ended my career as an international marimbist. I decided then I should have studied the flute or the violin, anything, but I was not getting across town very well with the marimba. But it was a good experience. While I was there, we did some fantastic concerts, and that whetted my appetite. But one thing I want to add, and then I'm going to end this. I'm not even going to talk now about the director of music position, because that was something else that was an extreme experience. I was at church, and I belonged to what they call the young people's church, because 99% of the young people were, the people in that church were young. They were all college age, high school age. And we were coming out, and one lady said to my mother, "Isn't it amazing the sacrifices we make for our children?" And my mother said, "Sacrifice?" I'm hearing this like I just heard it yesterday. She said, "This is not a sacrifice. My children didn't ask to be born. So I'm going to give them everything I possibly can so they can make it in this life." I was so moved by that when I got home, I said to my mom, "When I get grown, I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me." And my mother said, "No, no, 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 no. You reach back and you bring somebody else along and take care of them the way I took care of you." And that's been my mantra. That's been my mode of operation from that day until this day. And that's my thread in the tapestry.
Well, I thank you all for that. We are not finished, so don't get too excited yet. yet. But it's nice to see the continuity. And it's funny looking at the screen, seeing how the things, I guess, on my screen go from left to right. And then, of course, Byron to Anne Marie. I'm just the person in the middle. But it is that thread that weaves through our lives musically, whether it be through siblings or teachers or experiences. We're all educators and we're all teachers. And I happened to listen to a talk that David and Uzee did when you were at Calvin College, and you talked about leadership and leading. And I was really moved by that presentation, not only in the conversation, but also with the student who invited you there, because it's all about giving back. And that's the thread. It's kind of also like a rope that we have, that we take that rope and we stretch it and give it to somebody else. So I thank you all for that, because I think it's important for people to know that you just didn't come, that you just didn't all of a sudden manifest itself with who you are now. And I think it's important for people to know that. So I want to ask this question. What do you think has been the greatest challenge in meeting the changing landscape of music, particularly in classical music, but just music of the African-American experience and music of the African diaspora? Because I think one of the things that I heard is how we have been exposed to things, those people who have come into our lives to enhance that knowledge that we have in music, and why we determined that we want to continue to do this. And Dr. Patterson, we're going to talk offline about your experience at Southern University, because I think we know some of the same people. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you. I did not know that. So who would like to go with that first, about the changing landscape of music? We're still saying the first Black person to do this, the first Black person to do that. We're still having those conversations. So what do you think has been the greatest challenge in trying to bring us all to the table, whoever the all is? Anybody have any thoughts or concerns about that question?
I'd like to throw out this, which I hope is fairly pertinent to your question and observation. The importance of music as a whole and the contribution to that whole that our diversity in this country makes has been, in my opinion, a severe matter of neglect in all aspects of it. The absorption of the American populace of spirituals, jazz, blues, and I guess that pretty well covers most of the things that I need to point out, has led too many people to misunderstand the capacity of the African-American contribution to American music and to world music as a whole. The fabulous contribution which the legacy of African-American music has made in the classical field is that I think an immense challenge that the country as a whole, and we specifically as a people, have neglected. And that's a challenge that I think needs much addressment. If I make my point clear.
No, I appreciate that. Yes, and I agree. Anybody else?
Can I just add to this? I think there are perceptions regarding the music of Africans and African Americans that there's this sort of monolithic kind of musical presence. In one sense, it is, because it is a large umbrella under which there are many parts. The important thing to remember is that our music is multifaceted. And that is what I have appreciated over the years more than anything else about African American music, because it is not one thing, and it is indeed indicative of an experience that is an expression of life. So all the things that we are in life, we are in music. And I think to capture that means lifting up all of the different aspects of our musical compositional experiences and those things that have grown out of our indigenous folk experiences, and realizing the value of those things. The danger, I think, and one that Dr. Patterson spoke of, is not understanding that we do more than just this one thing. We do more than just jazz. We do more than just classical. We do more than just gospel or the blues. We do all of this, and in many ways, there have been those who've done music in every one of these genres exceptionally well. We cannot continue to exist as a kind of Bedouin culture. When I say this, we just graze and then we move on without any sense of legacy and continuity with that which we have done, and that informs what we will perhaps do. And I think the most important thing here is to make sure that things like what NAM does stays alive, because we are preserving a part of a legacy. I believe that the breadth of what we do needs to be extended in some ways to be more inclusive of some other aspects of music, and then understanding that connectivity. But the most important one thing in all of this is that we must never sacrifice quality for any kind of specific genre or quantity. We have to do the best that we can, whether we're doing classical music or gospel or whatever it is, to represent the highest and best of our own contributions to the music world, which are many, because it informs so many other cultures. And I think that's one of the values of African American music. It's been so pervasive worldwide because of its influences.
I think that it's very interesting when we think about African American music, and the too many times it's considered nostalgic in a way, or in such a way that, oh, we didn't know you all did that, especially when it comes to classical music. And I've had the opportunity to, be around people. The most telling thing to me was to have read this wonderful book that Eileen Southern wrote, The Music of Black Americans, and then been led by mentors like Wanda Whalum to books that preceded hers, because most people stop at that book, and and they should stop and linger. But here's the thing that I thought was always wonderful. For me to read these people's names in this book and then come to NAM and talk to them and meet them, that was amazing to me, to see this article or this little blurb about a man named Willis Patterson who played Amal in The Night Visitors on television. And then I get to go and say hello to him. That's amazing. That is, and when I teach my students, luckily, I wanted to take this course called Survey of African American Music when I was a student. There were not enough hours that I was going to pay for to stay an extra year to take another class. And I end up teaching the class. It's always very interesting because the students don't know these people exist. And then when I say, well, I met so-and-so, they look, well, of course they say, well, you old, you met everybody. But just to have that opportunity, and then when we use that as a way to bring younger people to NAM, I have a student who always calls me a legend. I said, well, you'll be in the books too. Just keep doing it, And so just to have that. But I think this whole idea of that it's so odd bothers me a little bit. And that we don't do, as Uzee said, do what we can to talk about our own stuff in a way that it does not become something that is a surprise every time they see it happen or other people see it happen. We can talk about African Americans in classical music during the slave period. And when I tell my students that, oh, we did classical music then? I say, yes, we did. Then there is the idea of the minstrel show. Oh, well, nobody want to talk about that. That's racist. I said, exactly. But do you know about the African American minstrels who took the opportunity to, instead of acting like Black people, be Black people and make the same money? Oh, so I think those kinds of things, the caretaking of our history, we have to do. And we can't really begin to make people see us right if we don't see us right. And so it's a very interesting kind of thing that has to happen. And I'm so happy that I had the experiences in NAM. I'll never forget the look on my brother's face when I was home in Rochester, New York. And somebody called and he answered the phone, and it was for me. And he said, "Man, ask who's calling." And it was William Warfield. My brother's eyes got this big because he knew about William Warfield and he's calling to ask for my little brother. Wow. So those kinds of experiences are important. And so that's enough on that from me, but somebody else may want to add.
No, and I agree with what all you have said, because the concern is fostering this broader understanding, because if truth be told, the music of our people is really the American history book. We could write American history from the beginning of time till now, just based on our music. And it could start with the field hollers. It could be including the blues, the ragtime, the jazz, even rap. All of this, and of course, it does not exclude anything we've done. I always have a fear that, as is in many churches, they throw the baby out with the bath. So may have a marvelous pipe organ, but they decide, oh no, we're now just using keyboards, so the pipe organ goes somewhere. I'd like to see us add on and just perfect what we have and be inclusive with everything. Don't ever get to the point where it's not worth it. It is worth it. So you have your rap, and you'll have your musical theater, and many of our young people, they have never heard of our classical composers. And you say, well, we're going to play this number by this woman was the first, as far as I'm concerned, Price was the first African-American conductor of a major orchestra. Our students, they're amazed. You mean we had a Black, and she's female? So these things have to be kept and they have to be perpetuated. And I think as we look toward the future of NAM, we're going to see more of that. And we have to be very careful that we don't become, snob is not the word I want to use. Help me out here. There are some of us who just complacent, all right. Some of us just want to hear classical music. They're not really interested in anything. If it's not classical or a spiritual, they don't want to hear it. And we have to be open. We as a people have to be open and inclusive. We want the rest of the world to be inclusive. But are we inclusive? Are we aware that all of our music is important? And I would love to see, Dr. Patterson and Dr. Brown, we have to look forward to the next, because our history book ends at 2004. So what's happening from 2004 till now? Who's writing that next, that secondary book? And I'm glad I was able to buy my book at a reasonable price, because I was ordering it for somebody in our group and it was $450. And I said, no, somebody around here has got to find a better price than that. And that was Amazon. But we want to be able to continue this story from 2004 moving on.
Are you saying, excuse me, that you went to Amazon to purchase the history of NAM?
Yes.
And got this kind of an exorbitant price?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Well, the unfortunate part is that, and that I was alluding to this earlier, I had already spoken with Sam Floyd at Center for Black Music Research regarding the publication of the history, and he had agreed to do it because of his high regard for Doris Evans McGinty, who wound up having to pick this project up because pretty far along in our conversations, I realized that Dr. Southern was having some health problems. But the result of that was that, quite frankly, NAM could not afford to self-publish. And the agreement was such that there would be a limited number of copies, and the control of that copyright was not going to be exclusively NAM's. And that's something that Roland had to ultimately negotiate, Roland Carter. And I'm not sure what all of the conditions were, but that was not, as I understand, a reprint of this book. And consequently, if it was not purchased during those first 2 or 3 years, the copies were disseminated, and it is a rarity to find a copy now, and that is unfortunate. I do think the fortunate part is that if there's been only one copy done, then that means somewhere there exists a documentary history of NAM that takes us up to the end of at least 2002, I believe, was the end of my presidency. I don't think we got far enough along to include Roland, who followed me. But I was very pleased that that was captured, because for all times, when you're talking about preserving history, for all times, there's something there that is written that captures who we are, who we were. And I believe it is extremely important to be able to have that kind of written documentation, because things tend to shift if you have to depend upon anecdotal kinds of experiences to know what happened and what was. So even under the obstinate conditions of trying to get this thing published, the fact is that it did get published, and I am so happy that that occurred.
Yes.
And I will second all of that. As they say, emotion. I think that's what Smokey Robinson used to say. I second that emotion, because it is important for all of us who are fortunate enough to have a copy, to see it, notate it, and all of the things that have happened in NAM through the years. So hopefully somebody will take up that mantle in some form or fashion, that we can notate it for other people to see as well as ourselves, because a lot of us need to read it ourselves. And I thank you for the book and all of the work that went through it and on it through all of the presidents to make that happen, because it's a great book. So I want to kind of end with one question. We cannot leave this conversation without talking about some of the contemporary issues. So when we think of social justice, equality, and racism, which has existed and continues to exist even now, since the existence of, or the inception of NAM, I'm sorry, how do you think music has addressed some of the issues that we continue to face even today?
And again, and I'll make this brief because I want to hear from some others as well. But one of the lectures that I've done consistently has been with music, African-American music and protest. We have had some kind of music that has accompanied virtually every experience, certainly in the public forum, that we've had as a people. And as I said, it's because our music captures it's an expression of life. But when you look at the various forms of music that have been offered up as music that accompanies our struggles, then you find that you're going to find compositions across every genre. Again, you're going to find jazz works. You cannot not leave out a Nina Simone. You cannot leave out the wonderful poetic settings of Langston Hughes, any number of African-American composers, including people like, what are we thinking of here? I Too Sing America, Margaret Bonds, the whole cycle of songs that she did. You cannot leave out even more contemporary composers, and Dr. Morrow can speak to this, where we have a setting of the 7 last words which represents a protest in a sense against the abuses of people of color. And David can speak more to this, and I will defer to him because I think this is such an important piece, and it's the kind of contemporized consideration of our music and what we should be doing in terms of making a statement through our music. If David, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind sharing that.
I don't mind sharing it. It's an interesting work by a young composer, Joel Thompson, who's from Atlanta. And he wrote this piece, 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. The shape of the piece and the form is very similar to the 7 Last Words of Jesus on the cross. And there are several settings of that classically. He writes it using the words of 7 African-American men who were unjustly killed and what their words are. And those are the 7 movements that they're there. It's interesting in that it comes up with several different kinds of styles, and he uses the l'homme armé, is the old melody is woven throughout, and he said he could not necessarily get out in the street what he wanted to do. He felt like, he said, how is it that being a Black person can be deadly? And he felt badly about that. So what he does is to create a piece of music that shows that. And ironically, the last movement is Eric Garner's words. I can't breathe. I'm sure that when Joel wrote that, he didn't expect this to be a long-lasting piece of music, nor to have the same words uttered again. And so you have these ways to get the music out, and people have been using words and using music, and because of the diversity and all of the different kinds of ways we can create. I mean, the whole idea, for example, of blues is not just to feel bad, it's actually to feel better. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand that. You know, they feel like they got to get a glass of Hennessy and fall out. No, they are trying to feel better and trying to make you understand where it comes from. And it comes out in our music all the time. It can be classical, it can be blues, it can be jazz, it can be gospel, it can be any kinds of contemporary music, including rap. And all of it isn't angry. A lot of people are afraid that way. And we're just trying to get you to see what's going on. I've been looking at these wonderful poems by Langston Hughes in his book, The Panther and the Lash. And there's one in there that if you didn't know it was by Langston Hughes, you'd think somebody just wrote it. And so we're wondering, why are we still doing this? And so the music is gonna, we have to get it out. We have to, the whole idea of artistic expression demands it.
Yes. And it's we can't leave this subject without pointing out that wonderful opera by Anthony, I want to say Anthony Davis, but here.
That's correct.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. The 5 boys.
Oh.
The 5 boys in New York who were jailed for a crime they didn't commit, right. And the crime for which our current president still feels they should be punished for, even though it's understood that they didn't commit the crime. They killed a girl. They didn't commit the crime, and the person who did commit the crime has already been identified several years ago now. But that wonderful opera has, I guess, made its debut this year, last year, and wants to be premiered in the Met. I don't think the Met did it because of the abbreviated season due to the pandemic. You know what I'm talking about? The opera?
Sure.
Yeah, the Central Park 5.
Central Park 5, exactly.
Well, go ahead, Uzee. Uzee. I'm gonna get it right.
David said something that's very interesting about when he was talking about the blues, about wanting to feel better. I often say that our music has been, including the sorrow song, it's been our psychological counseling couch before we ever knew what a psychologist was.
Yes.
We have sung through our sorrows. We have made music to answer the questions of our pain. And we're talking about the difficult and challenging parts of African American life, but our music also speaks to the kinds of things that are the joy, the romance, family, anything that you can think of, we address it in some kind of way. Some of the most wonderful music that I love happens to be from the 70s that just, you cannot miss the themes of romance and love in our music and the kinds of things it represent. I think the higher values that we carry in terms of our emotional expression that have to do with family. So it's not all sad.
No. And
Yeah,
go ahead, Dr. Patterson.
I was going to say, in fact, that wonderful song by Thomas Kerr on a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, Riding to Town.
Yes.
It's exactly what you've just described, Uzee. It's well, pure joy.
Yes. And humor.
Yes, very much so.
Well, I really want to thank you all, and I'm glad that we're ending with the words joy and humor because that's how it has been for me today to be amongst the giants. I kind of feel like a little flower amongst all of these big flowers because you have all been giants in my life even before I knew you. I had heard, in fact, Uzee, I have to share this. Even though I didn't know you, and I'll just say this publicly, Traveling Shoes was the first thing that I ever heard by you. I think you did a workshop in Jackson State University, probably back in the 90s. And a friend of mine went to the workshop and brought it back. And I was like, oh, this is cute. And, and I taught it to the choir. So I remember that. But Dr. Patterson, I have always known about you because your name was always spoken in hushed tones, and it's always Dr. Willis Patterson. You were never just Dr. Patterson, you were always Dr. Willis Patterson in one word. And so and how things just kind of come together, that I'm even sitting in this chair at this particular time. BJ, you know I love you special because you brought me into this fold. And David too brought me into this fold. Anne-Marie, you know, you and I have worked together since we both got on the board. So I feel extra, extra special. So if there's anybody that should feel honored, it is not the people that I'm talking to. It is the people that I have listened to. And I hope that when people hear this conversation, that they will have a better understanding of what NAM is, that there are brilliant minds that are not only bringing forth music, but you're sending it out. Because if it just comes to you and it doesn't go out, then we have not done what we are supposed to do. So I thank you for letting me be a part of this tapestry. So in closing, like the clothes each of us are wearing today, we are also the individual threads that make up the fabric of our organization. The common individual thread that runs through each of us is our love and commitment to NAM, and it is our part of the contribution to the big design. It is our way of serving humankind, and God is requiring each of us to live, to breathe, to do, and to work together to make a difference. So I thank you all. I know this has been time. This has just been really wonderful, and thank you for the opportunity.
Can I say quickly, every thread needs a needle. and that needle needs to be guided by someone. And I think we want to thank you for doing such a great job in guiding that needle through to make the tapestry whole. So
Well,
we
thank you.
commend you, Madam
you.
Moderator, Dr. Sylvia T. Hollyfield, for your great
Thank
work in
you.
putting all this together, and
Thank
all
you.
the committee and everyone that is responsible for this great event. It is always good to hear our history so we know what shoulders to stand upon. Thank you.
once said that NANM is our best kept 100-year-old secret. It is important that our secret be told to everyone. We stand on the shoulders of great musicians who over the years changed the landscape of music in this country. Now, we have the awesome responsibility to strategically build our next 100 years. This year, we are initiating a nationwide membership drive to get connected. We're making a special effort to engage new members, reclaim previous members, and retain those hard workers who do the work of NAM every day. NAM is an influencer, setting the standard for music excellence. Our programming, scholarship, and the music we share, stellar, because we understand the power of music. So remember, when we meet one, we'll invite one because we want you to be a part of us. Get connected to NAM.